It's the People's Podcast Show with Adrian Biddle, Melissa Bartlett, and your boy, Kerry Digsby. It's your show, so tell us what you want to talk about. It's the At the Round Table Podcast Show. All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank y'all for joining us. It is another Wednesday. Oh, my goodness. Welcome. It is the At the Round Table Podcast Show. Tonight's going to be very interesting. It's going to be real cool. Unfortunately, we can't introduce the deacon tonight, but that's all right because Melissa and I, we're going to handle it. So I get to introduce the charming sister of mine that keeps us in line. She is Melissa Bartlett, aka Miss Pitbull. What's going on, sis?
Hello. Hi, ATRT family. I'm so excited to have you guys in this evening in the podcast. We have a super guest, really right on time with what's going on and what we're dealing with, just with our everyday lives and keeping up with different news feeds. Have somebody that can possibly help us make sense of some of the things that's been going on, some of the decisions that's been made. I am also just excited that it's Wednesday and we're halfway through this week. And it just seems like when you get busy and you get started with something, it's like you look up, it's 1 o'clock, you look up, it's 5, but that's the joy and the privilege of keeping busy. So I am super excited about tonight. I cannot wait for our guests to just talk to us and let us know it's going to be okay, hopefully. How are you, CD?
I'm doing well. It is, I guess, we're trying to do our best and get ready for the weekend. And we were just talking about that. It's the holiday weekend coming up before. Hopefully everybody be safe, be careful, be mindful. But it is a time for everybody to kind of like relax because it's been a lot going on. I mean, you see the news, you see what's going on. And I think, echoing your same sentiments tonight is going to be great because this gentleman is going to help kind of make a little more sense or connection to what we see. And I think a better understanding as well when it comes to the political realm. Okay. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Christopher A. Cooper. Yeah, just to give y'all a brief synopsis of this gentleman. He is a professor and the Madison Distinguished Professor of Political Science, and also with Public Affairs and Director of Public Policy Institute. This is at Western Carolina University. Go WCU. He and I were just talking not too long ago because my sons had the opportunity to go there. Kind of wish one of them did, but that's all right. We're not going to talk about that. We're not going to get into that. But it is an outstanding school, and this gentleman is the one who helped shape the minds of these young people, especially when it comes to what goes on in our community and also in the political arena. So welcome, Mr. Cooper.
Thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to it. Got to say, this is the best intro of any podcast I've been on in a long time. The music and the whole thing you guys got going on. It's way more fun than your average podcast. So thanks for having me.
Hey, Melissa, that's saying a lot because this gentleman has been quoted by means of the Times, ABC, NBC. Yep. I mean, the list goes on and on. So we got a shout out by means of him in regards to how I'm telling you, Mel, that's why we work so hard.
Let me practice. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
thank you.
Yes, indeed. Hey, Charlie Twos, thank you for joining us on At the Roundtable Podcast Show. I know you're going to have questions. Charlie is a long-standing fan and friend and family member of this particular show, been following us for well over years. So I know she brings a lot of questions. So, hey, Charlie, get ready. Oh, Charlie says she's wearing black, not red, white, or blue this July 4th. Okay. Interesting. Mel, that's your go-to right there. So I know she's going to kind of share with you.
I'm actually wearing pajamas.
That's all right too.
I'm wearing pajamas. The house is on notice. It is the day I am doing nothing.
That's all right. Sometimes you just got to sit back and relax and such. There's nothing wrong with that.
Well,
What
I
about
have to
you?
drop a shameless plug.
Okay.
CD, when you were talking about shaping the minds, I share with the family like who the guest is, and so my oldest is a senior, Chris, at Fayetteville State University. She goes, "Oh, he's the author of one of my books." So, she is a political science major with a minor in intelligence studies. So
Great.
she's super excited about having you on. And she's like, "Oh, can you ask him this? And can you ask him this? And can you ask him this?" And I was just like, "Give me one question." Just so you never know, like, who is going to appear on our show, and our guests don't know, like, you probably have written that book over how many years ago, and you're still influencing the youth in that career or that career path.
That's so great. That's great. Fayetteville State's a great school too, so that's really cool to hear.
So I'm curious, what one question did she give you?
So do we have to start out the gate with this one?
Well, ironically, okay, we could throw in the inquiry that I know Adrian, if he was here. I'm not going to do the Adrian.
You're not going to do the Adrian voice?
No, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be professional this evening.
Well, then I'm not going to do it either.
Okay, let's not do it. We're gonna say that for later on, so that way we don't get in trouble with him. But he did have an inquiry or a question in regards to the explanation or the definition of gerrymandering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. The way I describe it is pretty simple. When one party tries to draw district lines to benefit themselves at the expense of the other party, right? So that's, at its base, the way I tend to define it. But it plays out in lots of different ways. In some ways, it's good. I'm talking to two folks who live in Charlotte, or at least live around Charlotte, that, really North Carolina and Charlotte in particular have been the epicenter of so many of these redistricting fights, right? So that's the big definition. It plays out all sorts of different ways that I'm sure we won't get into, but the two primary ways we will call packing and cracking. So packing is basically when you draw lines, so you put as many of the opposing party's voters in a small number of districts. You pack them in there as you can. So the idea is it's like spotting the other team 5 points and making sure they'll get no more. Okay, so that's packing. They all go in there. So what happens is it turns all of the districts around there friendlier to your party. So you hope that you win by, say, 60-40, and they win a smaller number by, say, 80-20. But the other thing you can do is you crack. And so that's just what it sounds like also. You've got a big block of voters of one party, and you might want to crack them, stick them into multiple districts, so therefore you can win those districts. So it's a way to just use this district line drawing process to your benefit. And in North Carolina, the state legislatures are the ones who do this. So in some states, they have these independent commissions. In some states, the governor can veto them. In our state, governor has as much power as the three of us, right? Which is to say, not a whole lot of power in how this thing actually goes. It really is just up to the legislature and to some degree the courts.
Okay. And it's interesting that you mentioned that regarding the courts, because just recently, the Supreme Court, they had reinstated the gerrymandering Louisiana congressional map.
That's right.
And that seemed like so much is going on in these courts right now.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And so, that was a really critical case. And so basically the state court had said, these maps are no good. They're racial gerrymanders, right? And so they're meant to, benefit one party over the other, but by diluting the vote, by diluting the African-American vote. And the state court said that. And then the U.S. Supreme Court jumped in and said, just kidding. You guys can go through with these old maps anyway. In North Carolina, this stuff keeps getting kicked through the courts as well, and it has for years, but our court is barely held by the Democratic Party. So the upcoming elections in the fall are going to matter for so many things. We can talk about any of those you want to, but one I hope folks don't lose sight of, no matter where you sit politically, Democrat, Republican, Green, whatever, those judicial seats, the two that are up, are going to be crucial to determining things like gerrymandering and the legality of that in our state going forward. So it's going to be tempting to just pay attention to the U.S. Senate race. It's going to be the big shiny object in the corner, and it matters. Don't get me wrong, but those court seats also matter a ton.
I don't know how many times, Chris, we've told our viewers, it matters at the local level first.
Mm-hmm.
I know you get distracted, as you said, the big shiny object in the corner, the big, it's on every news outlet. It's almost like it's pushing it down your throat. It's being on your phone, but you need to make sure that you're just as involved and keep in touch and stay well read on any candidates and politicians at your local level. Yep. Because these are the people that are part of where you are every day. They are making decisions for you every day. And if you don't fight to have someone who's going to advocate for fairness, or as fair as they can be, it doesn't really matter about Republican, Independent, Democratic, because there's some people that may be on your ticket with what you're holding for, but you know that they're not ethically going to do what they need to do. So it is important that you make sure that you vote for the proper or the best candidate. And I am registered as a Democrat, but there has been a time where I have voted for a Republican in certain seats, and I'm not gonna hide behind it, because who was given to me as my party's option, I didn't feel was a good one.
Mm-hmm. That's what we want to see, right? We want to see people making smart decisions based on the facts, based on the issues, based on where these candidates stand, and as you pointed out, who these candidates are, right? So no matter where you sit ideologically, there has to be a line that somebody can cross that you go, that's just too much, as a person. And so, I think that's critical. And the decision on abortion at the U.S. Supreme Court even makes that more important, right? Because what's happening now is the states are the ones who are going to get to make all these decisions on abortion. So if you're trying to figure out you're pro-choice or you're pro-life, wherever you stand, you want to make an impact, the place to invest and pay attention is your state legislative seats. And if you've got any money you tend to give to candidates, that's where your money, you get the best bang for your buck. I mean, look at it this way. If you give money to Sherry Beasley or give money to Ted Budd, they're going to raise, $15 million. And so your $100 may not mean that much, but for a state legislative candidate, they may raise $50,000. Your $100 could actually be pretty important. It could actually means more. So just from a smart investing perspective, think about state legislatures. As you pointed out, think about these really local offices, school board, county commission, city council. That stuff matters in a really critical way, more so every day, I think.
Good point.
How much, how many, how often was your phone just notification once the Roe versus Wade was overturned?
Yeah, it was pretty fast and furious. So I was actually at the North Carolina Bar Association doing a little talk with them, and I just gotten off the little stage thing, and that was when 10 o'clock when it hit, and it was definitely coming in fast and furious. And it's hard. I mean, it's important, right, to get that information out there quickly, but I got to say, it's a 260 something page decision, 264, I think. Mm-hmm. So one thing for folks to keep in mind, maybe the information you're getting right from the beginning when nobody's actually been able to read and digest 260 something pages isn't the best. But by now, people have been able to read, they've been able to think, they've been able to put it in context. So I know we're all, myself included, we want it fast, we want it now, but sometimes we get better information, I think, if we just chill out just a little bit.
Yep, definitely. So with you being, and it's interesting because with you being at the school at Western Carolina, your connection with many of the students there, I guess the best way to say this is, or ask this is, what has been their thoughts, not only just regarding Roe versus Wade and it being overturned, but just with the whole political realm right now? Because, I mean, if you really think about it, what we, the interesting term that was, several years ago with Donald Trump and the things that occurred from there, and then now leading up to these hearings that are going on January, from January 6th situation, and then to even now, what has been their thoughts? The young people, the students that at first maybe did not pay attention to the political realm. Now all of a sudden it's like, oh wow, this is what I'm a part of.
Yeah, no, I think there is definitely some of that. So on the Roe v. Wade issue, it is summer, so I don't know quite as much what they're thinking. We'll figure that out in the fall. But as you pointed out, and I think framed it beautifully, right? This kind of bigger political moment that we're in. I've been at Western Carolina 20 years teaching. And at the beginning, I think my challenge was like getting students interested in politics and excited, saying, hey, this matters. Now they walk in the door knowing that it matters, right? Now they may know it matters because they're so ticked off. They may be so upset. They may want it to change. They may think it's terrible. But that here's why you should care piece, I think is less it's less of a challenge than it used to be. So when I talk to the students, I should say students are like anybody else. They vary. We've got one thing I like about Western Carolina, honestly, is it's not a liberal bastion. It's not a conservative bastion. It really is a purple school, right? Purple is one of our colors, and it really is true for students. And so we get some pretty robust discussion, and we certainly have, people that are way to the right and people that are way to the left. But they coexist in the same classroom. And what I hear from them is they know it matters, but they're also kind of disgusted. They're kind of disgusted by politicians. And the part that worries me a little is they want to make a difference, but they don't know that being active politically and running for office is a way to do it. And so one of my big messages I try to get across to students is, one, think local, and we already talked about. And two, you can run for office, right? The only way to get better people in office is to have better people run for office. I think as you framed perfectly, it's about the choices you have before us. And so now my challenge is less it matters and more you can matter and you can do something to change this.
Well
That's
said.
great, because the instructor of the courses, having a policy in my home, she makes me think of things different, and then being part of this new generation. So Chris, I have about to be 22 and 20-year-old, and so just the way that they have helped me unlearn tradition, and they just started asking questions. Well, why? Why do you do it that way? Or why is it done that way? Or why do you have to say that? Or why, and I'm like, well, and I'm like trying to go to a core, not to just say, hey, well, that's what my mom did, or that's what I was told, or, you start understanding I'm doing this because somebody else told me to. And so having that kind of, I don't want to say confrontational, let's just say enlightenment from my two, and then having a classroom full of them. It's important, I think, that they are governed and they are influenced to not get caught up in the radical terms and energy that they feed off of social media. So how do you balance that while keeping them grounded in, hey, this is law, versus what they're coming in with in their hands, on their laptops, pads, everything that's just so there all the time. How do you keep that balance with your students?
Yeah, it's harder than it used to be for all those reasons you just named and listed so well. I think for me, it's a matter of saying, these are facts, these are points of disagreement. So I try to be really clear with my students. We're not going to argue about basic facts. Certain things happened, and there's certain patterns that we see in human behavior. Now, that doesn't mean that there's no point of discussion. Of course there is, right? But I try to be really clear on, these are facts and these are points of discussion. So if somebody says January 6th didn't happen, I'm sorry, it did. That's a fact, right? We're not going to argue about that. I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen. I'm not going to pretend that was not an insurrection. But if somebody wants to say, well, why did a certain person feel this way? Or why do people feel motivated to do this? Or what are the best solutions for this problem? To me, those are great points of discussion and to be wide open. So for me, it's just about differentiating, not just because it's hard to do, but making sure I differentiate facts from opinion. And I also try to do a lot of, I do this enough where my students make fun of me for it. So I know I do it a lot. I'll say things like, look, one side will say this, and the other side argument tends to be this. And then I'll kind of put it to them to see if they have a third way. But that's kind of my way of signaling to them, okay, here were the facts. Now we're into argument land. And that's good too. And that's really important. But I think separating those and just not falling into the fact, to this notion that there are no facts. There are facts, and they're still out there, despite what some Facebook feed says. Or TikTok. Facebook's too old, right? We shouldn't. We're dating ourselves when we say Facebook. So
right. That was actually my daughter's question. She just wanted to know, with your position in your purpose of having to uphold the ethics of the vote, how has this influenced your job with your colleagues, and then with children that's coming up, your students that should be by this time registered voters? How has this caused you to change what you do, and even possibly how you feel about your actual career?
That's great. I love that question. I don't have a good answer, but although I do love the question. It's changing, I think, every day. Hopefully, every day I'm changing, right? Hopefully, being exposed to new ideas and new perspectives. I mean, I'm one person. I've lived one life. I've got one perspective, and it's a singular one. And so, one thing I love about teaching, and frankly, teaching at a university, I think, does a terrific job, but it's not Yale or Princeton or Harvard, right? I mean, I'm getting students from all over the place. I'm getting some students who came from money, getting students who didn't come from money, from urban places, from rural places, from suburban places. And so I try to listen to their perspectives. And what I find that they're the best at doing is raising questions, kind of like you were saying, why is this? Or giving me ideas about things to study, giving me ideas about things to research, because I've been looking at the world this certain way, and then they'll come in and say, well, why do we do this? And sometimes I just haven't thought about it. I've just taken it for granted. And so the questions they ask, I think, are as valuable as the things that they tell me. And the same thing's true for me anyways, for talking to journalists and having this conversation even today, that the questions people ask me, that's what really gets me thinking. And that's what ultimately, I think, changes my perspective, is the fact that people would think to ask a certain question, right? I just wouldn't think sometimes because I'm me. And so I think it's just about moving forward and being excited, and I'm being aware that I'm super lucky. I love what I study. I think it's really interesting. I think it's really important. And I try to be open to other perspectives that are out there.
All right. So I have to play my role because they say I'm the guy that stirs.
Good.
Don't know how I got that, but I'll take it.
I do.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. We'll talk later. But anyway, no, just to kind of go back to, your expertise regarding let me see if I can word this correctly. What do you think is the difference between politics and Southern politics?
Oh, great. Yeah, that's such a good question. And so sometimes I promise I'll come around to answer directly, but I'll take the long way if it's okay.
I knew you would. Go
ahead. Sometimes when I teach a Southern politics class, I'll tell the students the first day, the final exam question is, do we need this class? Or is Southern politics now just like politics in the rest of the country? And so we just need to get rid of the class and move on. Rarely do students take that, yes, we need to move on perspective. Maybe they're kissing up. I don't know. But to me, I guess Southern politics, first of all, it is distinct in some ways. And I think it's distinct because of the unique history. So much of Southern politics comes from the history of slavery and the ways in which we're still constrained in our thoughts and patterns and behaviors from the days of slavery. There's a book way back on the shelf here, argues that places with larger proportions of slaveholders and slaves are actually politically different today, that these behavioral patterns and attitudes get passed down from generation to generation. And so in places with larger numbers of slaves and slaveholders, they got passed down in a different way in places where that didn't exist as much. So I think the original sin of slavery plays out in the South in a really distinct way. I think obviously patterns of race relations in general, it's the most diverse region in the country, although people don't tend to think of it that way. I think and sort of connecting to our discussion at the beginning, I think the way the local plays out in politics is different here in the South. And that isn't always better, isn't always worse, but I do think it's fundamentally different, right? Jesse Helms would not have been from Massachusetts, and Mike Dukakis would not have been from South Carolina. And that tells me that there are still regional distinctions. And so that class is a really fun one to teach. I always have to struggle a bit. Sometimes there's students who think it's going to be a celebration of the South or that it's going to be just ripping on the South. And the reality is it's neither, right? It's neither at all. It's trying to grapple with the South, what it is, and why it is different. I mean, to me, that's a really interesting question.
That was my daughter's. She was definitely like, I don't know what it is. That was her too. She's like, it's either going to be where we're going to be celebrating the South and all of their traditions and all the things. And she's like, or, I know it's going to be an interesting class because when the, the facts come out, the truth come out, things that are documented that may not have been taught ever before. Once you get to this class, it's going to be like, that's not true. Or, so she definitely loved the class when she took it. And it definitely opened her eyes living here because, we travel, we go up north, we have family up north. And it's a great thing as a parent, but I think as a aging generation, when the younger generation, you see it in their eyes and it starts to become full circle. And it starts to say, oh, because now they have other experiences, college, you have education, you have, now you're old enough to look at the news. I was going to say read a newspaper, but that would have been a lie. Reading, the post on your phone and the comments. And so, I think it's great to have courses like this because for those who don't know what Southern life is like, other than attending a university, it helps give them some perspective. And even if they are not a political science major, your friends are going to talk to you about it. And you're going to have those group conversations when you're all in a group and you have something major like Roe versus Wade or the 1-6 insurgent. Like you have someone who you're like, hey, you're being educated, you're being taught. I think for me, because of her, I have learned to appreciate news, to take a better or a deeper interest in politics, and have a pride in the importance of the accountability I have as a citizen to make sure that I exercise my right to vote.
That's so great. And it's, if we think about the right to vote, I mean, even that, the way that right to vote has changed in some ways in the South, I think is different than it has in the rest of the country. And I think we shouldn't ignore that. It was interesting. So my co-author and I did some focus groups with the book that were really fun because we just kind of like this, just sitting around talking to people about politics and asking people, are you Southerner? When did you decide that? And these are all people who live in the South. And by and large, people would say, I didn't think I was a Southerner until I left the South. And then people treated me differently. And I heard that from African Americans, and I heard that from whites, and I heard that from people of other races too, that leaving, exactly what you described, the kind of traveling, that piece is what makes people realize oftentimes, hey, I am a Southerner. Now, that doesn't mean I'm always proud of it, but it does mean that it's different, it's distinct, and people treat me that way. And so, yeah, it's really, really interesting stuff.
Oh yeah, I definitely can echo those sentiments. Being from Long Island, New York, and then moving here to the South. My father migrated from here to New York, and I was born and raised there. And then coming here and visiting during the summers, you know, it would always be that type of distinction. Oh, here come the Northerners, or it was always that distinction. And then when you move here and then you go back, the twang in your voice, the mannerisms, uh, you want more sugar in your tea, things like that. They would say, and it's just, it's interesting how it's, that line, that dividing line. You get through Virginia, that's it. Hey, you back north and such. But and it's ironic though, because I think too, when you mention as far as the history, in the South, the history in the South when it came to voting and the things that occurred, a lot of injustices, and how people literally, for all intents and purposes, they fled the South in order to go up north to get a better way of life and such. And I think that added to much of the disparity. If that makes sense.
No, I think you're exactly right. I think that Great Migration was critical in changing the South and changing the North, and then this sort of great remigration that's occurring.
Yes.
I think it's changing things back again. And yes, Charlotte's a great example of that. Of course, Atlanta's a fantastic example of that. But you see that all throughout the South. There's a Charles Blow book from a couple years ago where he sort of makes that argument that African Americans in general should remigrate to the South because that's where the voting power can actually be the strongest. It's a really interesting argument, right?
I've heard that. Yeah, I definitely heard that.
And
it's interesting too, because like my oldest came in just not too long ago, right before we got on, and we were, I have my T-shirt on that says Brooklyn because I love wearing stuff from up and always represent. And he brought it up. He said, it's interesting that you're wearing that, Dad. He said, because I got a chance to learn more about the Brooklyn Village that was here in Charlotte, and that caused a big discussion between him and I. And a lot of people, really weren't aware of it until probably, I want to say maybe 6 years ago, because I used to work for Mecklenburg County. And, during that time, there's a place right across from our offices, which is a huge park, Marshall Park. And they originally slated that to be closed down because they were getting ready to rebuild Brooklyn Village. Way back in the 70s, if memory serves me correctly, the 70s, Brooklyn Village was torn down, and it gave way to the East Independence and Midtown Square and all those areas. And at that time, Brooklyn Village was a predominantly Black area. And he was like, yo, and I'm listening and I'm reading about this stuff, and he said it's just so amazing how that was just like literally just torn away due to progress that was going on in Charlotte, North Carolina. I mean, the only thing that is remnant now is from my understanding, there's a funeral home, Alexander Funeral Home, that is it's like one of the remnants of that particular area. And then you have the Cherry neighborhood. I don't know, Mel, if you're familiar with that, but Cherry neighborhood, there's some small shops and things of that nature that still have African Americans that live there. But I mean, they've been living there, I mean, literally for almost 100 years. That's the last vestiges of Brooklyn Village.
There's a street up now. It's called, I think it's Brooklyn Village Drive. There's a street uptown in Charlotte now that's called Brooklyn Village Drive.
Yeah.
Literally seen it Saturday, Sunday. I was uptown and I was like, oh. I couldn't remember. I didn't know that they had that there. So it's good to, and this is that bittersweet spot, Chris, where it's good to have some acknowledgement, but to have the acknowledgement and then, that's like someone burning down your home where you used to have a bed and breakfast and you serve dinners and stuff out of. Someone burns it down and then they go, that was one of the best African American bed and breakfasts in like the county. But they're, everything that could have, affected the neighborhood, the community, their own personal, long-term generational worth, longevity, that's gone. So what does that really mean? What does that really, feel? Yes, I feel great that that was acknowledged, but like, what does that really do for what the action that was taken? So it's definitely it's that part where you kind of go, yay, but is it really a yay? And I'm the opposite of you guys, because I was born in Pittsburgh. We moved to Montgomery, Alabama, 75. And then I was there until I turned 16. And then that's where I went back to Pittsburgh. And so in the summer, I would go to Pittsburgh. And because it was fast, and I was called Southern Belle, and everybody knew my cousins knew, like, oh, that's your cousin from Alabama. That's your cousins from down in the sticks, or the Gump, whatever. All these jokes. So I was always excited, like, yes, like I'm going to the city. But there were certain things that was part of me. There were certain things that still made me go, wow. And when I would come back home for the summer, I would recognize how much has changed, but not changed. Mm-hmm. How those ways affected my family members, even until that time. This is like, mid 80s. And I had a great uncle who was like 6'5", 6'6". He worked for the CSX Railroad. And this is when the insurance man would still come to your house to get your payment.
Yeah.
And this young white guy would come, fresh out school probably, and fresh into the field, knock on the door, polite, hey, how you doing? Hello. And my great uncle would not look this young man, to him, a boy, in the face. He would not. And I didn't understand until I understood. Mm-hmm. And here you are, you're a grown man, and you have this job, and he's huge. He's a big guy where anybody would probably be intimidated, and he literally would not look the insurance guy in the face. And that's because he was raised that you didn't look white people in their face when they're talking to you. Like, you don't make eye contact with them. And so all of these things help shape and help form my foundation of what it really means to have pride and respect, not only for who you are, but history. Mm-hmm. Because that's not going to be printed in a book. That's not going to be taught in a class. That's a real life experience of that. I have so many stories of growing up in Montgomery that, again, this was the 80s. This is, from 1980 to 89. And like, people are like, oh, well, because there was a law passed and, there was a bill approved, it does not guarantee the execution of it. At that time, at that moment, it does not, there's no button that is pushed. So the South definitely has, and I still feel has their own set of rules, in their own timeline, regardless to what may or may not be passed down.
That's such a, agree completely. So interesting. Yeah, just the way that people's memory works and these patterns and stories. I had no idea about Brooklyn Village in Charlotte. I'm going to look that up later. But I think in your point about how memorializing this, it's good, but it's not like it makes things okay, right? I think it's so smart. I think a lot when I drive up to Virginia and I go up 85 and go by Soul City. I don't know if you all been there. But the same thing. Here's the remnants of a community that did mean something, and it was important. And now it's not there very much at all. And there's, even very little signs that it was there. So yeah, these are real people's lives. And what did that mean? I think it's absolutely fascinating. When I was talking to people for that book, African-American woman mentioned, so we started about the Confederate flag, of course, right? And there's this mini story stuck with me, but one in particular was this woman said she was downtown and she went to, that moment when you're about to cross and the light turns and it turns red and the car's coming and you think, okay, if that person's going to stop, I'm okay. But if they're not, I'm going to get hit in the crosswalk, right?
Mm-hmm.
So she says she looks, it's red, she pauses, she's ready to walk. It's light says to walk. And the front of the truck that was coming had a big Confederate flag on it.
Mm.
She said, I didn't walk for that entire cycle. And just to hear her tell that story, like she was going somewhere, she had somewhere to be, but the grooves of the memory of that hatred stuck with her so much that no matter what that person intended or wanted or thought who was in that truck, the message that he was sending to her was one of hate. And it really just kind of, stuck with me. And another good example of where, you have to hear from people's experiences to really understand how something hits them.
Yeah.
Indeed.
That's it. That's a conversation with the African-American household and, law enforcement. You have to validate that, yes, you need to be concerned, but you have to also make sure that there's that balance statement to it. Like this is who we have that's supposed to protect and serve us. And you have to make sure, like, hey, not everyone is what's on social media, or if it does make the news, on the news. For that one, there's 18 that's not. And so you have to make that balance. But, how she felt is how, even me, I feel the same way. I'm very guarded in certain areas. And I'm very kind of like almost on edge sometimes, depending on where I am. When I'm driving through from here and I'm driving home, I got to go through West Virginia. There are certain times, depending on where I'm at, I'm not stopping. There are certain times where I'm stopping in the same place. I've never had any bad experience, thank God, at all, no matter if I'm driving at night or in the morning. But you do have that. And the reason why you're having that is not because, I'm out here on the road by myself, or, I'm a woman, I'm driving alone. I literally feel like, okay, I'm a Black woman, and I don't know if that's going to target someone. I can't do anything about being a Black woman. That's just here to stay. So wherever you decide to go and wherever you decide to take a plate, participate in, or, you're like, I'm Black. We're Black doing whatever it is. And so there's that anxiousness, that cautiousness of it, and the prayerfulness for me that I don't have or run into anyone, whether it's a regular citizen or if it's law enforcement or whoever the case, that it triggers the fact that I'm Black.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I think if you look back in history as well, and then even now, and I know I've had the opportunity to talk to a lot of people and a lot of African Americans as far as like just the whole voting process. And it's interesting, and maybe you can shed some light on this as well, Chris. I've had great conversations with brothers, and we're saying, hey, voting is important. Voting is important. I even think back to when Hillary Clinton ran, and I'm sure you remember Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, the whole fiasco that went on there. It was literally split. And I remember a celebrity coming to Charlotte, and we were doing an event, and one of the things he was trying to do is to really get people to go to the polls, and a lot of people had negative ideas about going to the poll. One guy, I hear it clearly. Oh man, my vote doesn't count. It doesn't matter.
It ain't gonna matter. They're gonna do what they want to do anyway.
Yeah. And then you got some saying, "Oh, I remember when my granddaddy was trying to vote and blah blah blah, and they ran him off and stuff." And then I remember clearly, my wife and I, we're in Gaston County, and I remember going to a voting poll in Gaston County, and her and I walked, and we got there early because I believe in like, hey, let's get there, let's get it done, be the first one before the line comes. And we got in line, and we did it. And when we were coming out, there was an older woman with her granddaughter, and she came and she was wanting to vote. Well, ironically enough, a certain individual in a pickup truck come wheeling in with flags and pulled over to the side. Now, granted, he didn't have any flags that were, of course, for any of the candidates and such, but these flags were very distinctive of mine, I might say.
Mm-hmm.
And she, if you could see her expression, and she didn't want to vote then. And I said, no. I said, y'all did a lot for us just to get this opportunity. You need to vote. And I said, I'll stay with you. Me and my wife, we stayed there, and we was like, we walked her back up to the thing, you know, and she went in, she got her vote on, her and her granddaughter. But it's just those things right there. I think hinders many of us of our descent to actually let our voices be heard. Have you had any type of interaction with students maybe echoing those same sentiments?
Absolutely. Students and just people, right? And you said that so well. Obviously, you know, come from my perspective, there's absolutely nothing I would do to challenge any of that. I mean, that's a real experience that real people have, and voting is not everything. And I understand why people would feel that way. We talked about gerrymandering a few minutes ago, and is, you know, sort of a small part of it. We talked about racial gerrymandering in particular with Louisiana, but you know, another way to say, even if you do vote, there are things we can do to make sure your vote doesn't count as much. So I understand where that comes from. And I would never want to say voting is the only form of political activity that matters. It's not. I do think I'm heartened to hear you said, no, we're going to stay anyway, because I do think it does matter. I do think the evidence is that politicians, the only thing they will listen to is people threatening their jobs, basically. We know that politicians are motivated by re-election, not even for bad reasons, right?
Right.
I want to stay in my job to do a better job.
Right.
So I think it matters. I think it's critical. I think it's particularly to keep coming full circle to this local angle that Melissa talked about before. I think that's where it really matters too. So like last year, maybe I put some Twitter thread up that was all the different elections in North Carolina that have been decided by a coin toss. And it was a long thread. I mean, it wasn't thousands of tweets, but it was a long thread.
It was long. Good.
Right? Like, think about that though, a coin toss. And so I live in a small town in Western North Carolina. Two people on the town board got elected by a coin toss. There's a Confederate Confederate monument on the courthouse. And they had a big vote about the Confederate monument. And it turns out the two people who won by coin toss weren't real wild about the Confederate monument. So it changed because of two people's votes, two coin tosses. They didn't get rid of it, but they at least got rid of the Confederate flag off the front of the thing because of those two votes. So I think if we, you know, people tend to think it doesn't matter for the presidency. Maybe. You got a pretty good point, right? There's a whole lot of votes there. But for Gaston County Commission, the vote really does matter. So that's tend to be where I go with when I talk to people about that. But I do understand it. I appreciate it. And certainly you can't deny the history of voter suppression in America. I mean, it's here, it's real, and it happened. And it's still happening to some degree.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Hey, Mag Vegas, thank you for joining us on At the Round Table. This will be my first time not voting. I hope my heart changes right now. Feelings, nah. Interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. And I get it. I hope Mag does what's right for them. And I hope that people show up and vote. You know, on the abortion thing, it's really interesting. Wherever people sit on that again, the governor's veto is the key for that right now. If our governor did not have veto power, we'd be a pro-life state tomorrow. whether that's good or bad, again, folks can decide. My point is merely to say that it matters. But I understand the feelings of, I get it.
So, Chris, I have a question. I understand this is your life, but you are not just CNN walking around, a human CNN walking around. So what does Chris do to unplug? What do you do, to try to say, okay, I'm not thinking about anything, sweet potato pie, pound cake. I mean, what just makes your mind just be able to focus on something else and turn down the political noise?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take sweet potato pie. I'd be just fine. Okay. Those at work. I got 2 little kids I love to spend time with. I got a wife I love to spend time with. But I also spent a lot of time, actually just about 10 minutes before we started, I went on a mountain bike ride. And so I do a lot of that. I run a little, but I mountain bike, I kayak. I like to spend time outdoors. I like to spend time kind of in the woods, and that helps me. I don't think about politics. I just kind of enjoy being. I go to a lot of concerts when I can. Again, 2 young kids, can't always go. I like music, and I mean, I'm not just kidding about sweet potato pie thing either. Like, I like to go out and eat. I like to eat good food. I've been known to enjoy a beverage or 2 in my day.
Welcome, fellow foodie. Welcome.
Yeah. Tell Adrian, hey, you got another one on board.
That's right. So yeah, all the good stuff. So no, it's key, right? If I thought about this stuff all day, I'd be in the corner in that chair right now crying. So I try to not do that.
Do you get into a lively discussion regarding the political realm at home? Like, I know she just mentioned as far as the unwinding and such, but of course, we all bring some level of work home.
Yep.
Or something will flash on the TV, then all of a sudden it sparks either a dialogue or a debate.
Yep.
Look, I want to answer this one for Chris. He gets to say exactly what he really wants to say and how he really wants to feel, and don't have to worry about anybody else knowing about it. He does bring it on because he gets to say what he wants.
Yeah, right.
That's fun.
There you go.
No, I do. We do talk about it at home, and my wife's a history professor, so we have these conversations. Not all the time. We do talk about food. We talk about all these other things. But even the kids, we were talking before the show about kids and the questions kids ask. So I went to Washington, D.C. with my kids the other week. They're 7 and 9. My wife was doing work in the archives, historian. And my kids, we're not thinking about politics, but they started asking me questions like that I never would have thought to ask. So we're walking from the Washington Monument to the Lincoln Memorial. We have to pass by the World War II Memorial. So we spent some time there. And one of my kids says, "Why do we have so many wars?" Like, heck, I don't know, man. But then I'm thinking about it. And then we're walking from the Lincoln Memorial to the MLK Monument. And my daughter says, "Who is Martin Luther King?" And I thought, I'm going to let my son ask this. So then I asked my 9-year-old son to explain to my daughter. He did a better job than I would have trying to explain who King was and why King mattered and matters today. Even when I'm not trying to think about politics, I guess my view of politics is pretty expansive, right? I don't think it's just politicians in Washington doing stuff. It's these kind of conversations I think are inherently political. So it does come up. But if I'm by myself in the woods, it doesn't come up at all.
Good one, man. Wow. I'm telling you, this is Adrian missed out, but we have to thank him. We definitely have to thank him regarding this, because I think this show has been really informative, and it's actually been eye-opening regarding just the whole, not just the political realm, but I think more along the line, which you've echoed so many times during this discussion or chat or however you want to call it, but the behavior, I think, has been very key. Looks like certain behaviors that carry forward, and certain behaviors that people can't get rid of, and some that have been just ingrained in them. Yeah, that's been very important. You didn't take psychology also, did you?
I did. I took some psychology stuff, and I did a lot of political psychology work at one point in time. So yeah, I like to think about how people think about politics. And I know we're closing, so I'll keep it real brief. I promise.
No.
But to connect on the food thing, years ago we had a conference here about North Carolina stuff. We had a food scholar in, and real smart person. We're eating and hanging out and having a couple drinks. And at one point, one of the other people there said to this food scholar, well, food's not very political. And she's like, the hell it's not. And she walked through, she goes, who's doing the cooking? You don't think that matters? You don't think that means something for gender roles or for racial roles? For who's cleaning up? Why are we eating the foods we're eating? Why are there certain foods in certain regions of the country? And so I think it's a good illustration of that. There's kind of patterns that get grooved in, and how, no, they're not political like, some politician passing a law, but they sure are political in terms of who gets what, when, where, and how.
Mm-hmm. Man, I'm glad you said that. That actually brought forth a memory of mine out at UNCC Chapel Hill.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever you go there and you go down to the cafeteria, actually, there's an area where we had took classes by means of the NC School of Law, and there's a beautiful cafeteria there. But there's a mural that is on the wall that depicts African Americans. One in particular, he was very well known as a cook there. And he fed thousands of students, and just his interaction and such there, and how that actually, it kind of was, it was historic, and it actually set the tone, so I'm glad you said that. That was very poignant to mention that.
That made me think of Hound the Hog too, that on the Netflix.
Yes.
That was very interesting. And to think of so many dishes, so many recipes that probably is not getting the acknowledgement or stolen, that you're like, this is 100% American food, but it's not 100%, given the acknowledge of it. But I love Hound the Hog on Netflix. I thought it was such a great documentary about the history, true history of, Black chefs, and, the ones that cook for presidents, and the recipes, the similarities, some of the documents and some of the recipe cards that's been found and discovered. And, it makes you think about, okay, does this really mean, what does this really mean? Because I like to think of a cook being a cook. Not from France, not from Africa, not from, and I think that should only matter when the history and the influence is in the food, and it's foreign to you. I think that's when that needs to come up, to say, hey, this person is from blah, blah, blah. This is a seasoning or a root or an herb that's grown there, and that's why they have this taste, not so much, they're Black cooks, they're servants, in that kind of role. Like, that's the only thing and only way that American history kind of, made Black chefs seem like they were the help, and not as brilliant with their marrying of flavors as a French chef, So it absolutely, has influence, and it has dictation on our history and our politics, because there was only, when George Washington had certain people that he was having, there was a certain dish that he wanted, and there was a certain cook that he needed. There was, it definitely has. Who wants to have somebody that doesn't cook well, to have this dinner with, that you're going to need to rub elbows with to maybe get something that you want, So it definitely has an influence in our political history, for sure.
Oh yeah, and just think about this. And I thought about this, man. I'm telling you, we need to go to 2 hours.
Chris, back on, because it's so much stuff.
This is messed up. But I thought about this because I think about many times whenever certain races are going on, especially like in Charlotte, North Carolina, and the barbecues that always go on. And I remember when Vi Lyles came right up near us, right off of Brookshire, And there's a church that is there that does their barbecue, and she came out, and you're shaking hands and such, and especially in North Carolina, they're very well known, like, hey, got a barbecue going on or whatever sort. That's the best place to go to interact with potential voters, eat some barbecue, shake hands, see if you can sway the vote. But I think of this one instant. I used to work for a restaurant. It's called Mert's Heart and Soul in Charlotte, North Carolina. If you ever come to Charlotte, you want some soul food, go to Mert's Heart and Soul. Mertz has become a staple in the community. He's writing it down. Good job.
Yes.
He is a staple in the community when it comes to soul food. And history behind him, I remember when he first opened, but he used to be known as GA on Tryon. And he was there. He came from Georgia, moved to Charlotte. He opened a place called GA on Tryon. And many individuals that would get out of their hearings, or many individuals, Hugh McCall in particular, would go there after late at night in order to grab a bite to eat. And they were able to persuade him to get a spot located on College Street way before like the big construction and before Bank of America came into play and became part of the banking capital here. So I remember when I was working there, I was a manager for them and a general manager for them. But I remember when a certain president, and you know who he is. He's very well known. He shoots basketball. But he came to Charlotte, and we actually fed him. We had to go through the whole security clearance and everything like that and such. But just to think about how, he made it a point to say, I want that food. And then for all the people that were like involved in order for us to feed him, and how he was able to reach out to people and such during that. You're right. Food plays a huge part in the movers and shakers in the political realm, and they know it. So, but if you come to Charlotte, Mert's Heart and Soul, I'll take you there.
Cornbread, soul rolls. You have to get those two. I don't care whatever else you order. You have to also order cornbread and the soul rolls.
Okay.
Yes.
Cornbread and soul rolls. It's on. I got it on my notepad. I'm going.
Man, this has been cool. This has been amazing. Sis, do you have any other further questions or whatever sort? I had to bring in the food thing because this might be.
I did not. You always do that when I'm hungry. Like, stop. I don't. I have enjoyed, Chris. I enjoyed it. I was so like, I don't know. I too was like, should I change? Should I put on like a nice shirt? Since you're only going to see the top half of me anyway. Should I put on a jacket if I leave my t-shirt on? Should I throw a blazer on? I was like, okay, well, I'll wait to see what he has on before, Carrie lets me in, and then I'll make my adjustments. I have a blazer on my bed. And I love the fact that you were just laid back with us. Again, we say and name our show at the round table because at the round table, everyone can see and everyone can see who's speaking. And it keeps a connection with that shape. So we have enjoyed you. I have truly gained knowledge from you. And I have something to go back to my daughter with. So thank you.
Thank both of you. It was a really fun conversation, and I'm very glad I did not grab the sport coat because it's way more fun like this.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
What about you, CD?
I loved it, especially getting the shout out, that with the intro and just the whole vibe and such. I think we did our job regarding being able to bring this type of information to the masses and just making it lively and fun and not so stoic. We can have great conversation without having to be so serious, but still learn from each other during the course of it. So I loved it.
Absolutely. Chris, do you have any other projects or anything that you're going to be doing? We should be looking forward in the future.
I'm always trying to, I'll keep writing, and some of it's more academic and some of it's, aimed at regular folks. And so I try to keep doing both of those, working on a couple of book projects. So I'll try to get those out there and doing a little bit of writing for magazines and newspapers. And like Tina, I'm getting hungry now too. So
Sorry about that, Tina. We always have to plug in food, though.
You know, it's me. I don't have these cheeks for nothing.
Well, family, thank y'all for joining us on At the Roundtable Podcast Show. If you get a chance, please share the show with anyone that, again, did not get a chance to watch it. We'll go back and edit it and have it ready for our YouTube channel as well. And stay tuned. You know, you never know who we're going to have on here. But as we always say, you know, it's the People's Podcast Show. It's At the Roundtable Podcast Show. And shouts out to Adrian, A Money Biddle, for bringing us Chris Cooper this evening. It was great dialogue. We look forward to doing some more things with him and following him in his other endeavors as well, especially when you know you've got an author. You know, it's kind of good to have somebody, you know, to refer
and
to.
Chris CD's an author as well.
Hey, we ain't got time to talk about that. We're talking about Chris.
I'm going to Google that later.
Thank y'all once again for joining us on At the Roundtable. Thank you, Tina, for joining us this evening as well. Again, like and share, and we will see y'all again soon. Y'all be good.
My family.
Thanks.